Hey there, race fans. It's Race Day Top 5 with me, Frank 5. Darlington Raceway, the egg-shaped track, the Lady in Black, the track too tough to tame, so many nicknames for this racetrack, provides one of the most entertaining events of the year. The Southern 500, one of the sport's most iconic races, a crown jewel event. And for the third year in a row, it plays host to the first race of the NASCAR Cup Series playoffs. And last night we saw chaos for some of our drivers. Some of them were able to survive, but one driver, not in the playoffs, plays the spoiler. Let's get into what happened at Darlington. Number 1, Erik Jones. That Jones boy that Ken Squire used to call him, captured his third career Cup Series victory last night. His second ever Cookout Southern 500 win, holding off the likes of Denny Hamlin, Tyler Reddick, Joey Logano, and Christopher Bell, all playoff drivers by the way, to play the spoiler and win the opener of last night's playoff race. Let's go through Erik Jones' history before we get into how he won this race last night, shall we? So starting off, he makes his name in the NASCAR lower tier series, in the Xfinity Series and Truck Series, wins the Truck Championship in 2015, has a strong year in 2016. He makes his move to Cup Series in a relief role in 2015 for three of the top tier drivers back then. When the race started at the Spring Bristol race, Denny Hamlin dealt with back spasms and the race was about to resume after a long rain delay. Erik Jones filled in for him. They didn't really get the result, but he finished. Then he filled in for Kyle Busch in the 18 car, who's still yet to return from his leg injury at Daytona. Jones ran the top 5 a lot of that race until he spun out in turn 4 and hit the wall, taking him out of the race. And then he would come back later in the year to fill in 2 of the last 3 races in the 20 car, while Matt Kenseth served his 2-race suspension for the payback against Joey Logano at Martinsville. And that raised the eyebrows of these teams that saw how well he drove in some of these events and allowed them to keep him on the radar. He made his way up to the Cup Series full-time in 2017 for Furniture Row Racing, where he won Rookie of the Year, missed the playoffs, but still had a good season nonetheless. Then he moved to the main team, Joe Gibbs Racing, in 2018, replacing Matt Kenseth, who went off into semi-retirement. Jones made the playoffs that year by winning the night race at Daytona that year, but it unfortunately led to an early round elimination based on not a lot of good results and a lot of inconsistency on their part. The following year, he kind of was struggling around the bubble for a lot of the year. Then he would go on to win the Southern 500 by holding off his then teammate Kyle Busch at the time with an impressive walk-off win to punch his ticket to the playoffs, which unfortunately led to another early round exit. 2020 was a step back for Erik Jones. They didn't perform well, and they announced in the middle of the year that he will not be returning to Joe Gibbs Racing in 2020. Of course, that meant that Christopher Bell opened the door for him to drive the 20 car. Jones announced that he would drive the 43 for Petty Motorsports in 2021. And last year, they had a couple of good races. Not great races, but good races. He did well on his part for Petty Motorsports last year. This year, he came in as one of the premier drivers for this merger that happened in the offseason between Richard Petty Motorsports and GMS Racing, who's new to the Cup Series, to form Petty GMS Motorsports and start a 2-car team with Jones in the 43, Ty Dillon in the 42. And I gotta say, this year, the 43 team, Petty GMS Motorsports and Erik Jones, they have been on their game. They've had great race cars this year. The best cars I've seen from Petty in a long time. And this was with Chevy, by the way. They had good runs early this year. They nearly won the second race of the year at Fontana early this year. They ran in the top 5, top 10 in the Daytona 500. They had really good runs at the start of the year. They nearly won Talladega coming out of the turn 4. It looked like they were going to win, but they got passed in the travel by Ross Chastain and everybody else. He ultimately didn't win, but it was still a good effort nonetheless. Ultimately, he did not make the playoffs based on not being able to put together top 5 runs and a win in the last couple of races to get in. But nonetheless, there was big improvement for Erik Jones at this 43 team this year. And the biggest thing they want to do for these final few races is to get momentum for 2023. And the best way to do that is to win. And he did it last night. Ran top 5, top 10 pretty much the entire time. Erik Jones really has been really good at Darlington ever since he came to the Cup Series. He's always had good race cars here. He's just got a knack for Darlington Raceway. Ran the top 5, top 10 the entire night. Kind of played second fiddle of the drivers not in the playoffs. We'll talk about one of them a little bit later. But it looked like that he was going to probably settle for a top 5 finish. Then, as we were getting ready to come to this final restart, the leader in front of him, Kyle Busch, a playoff contender, blows up before we even get going again. And that gave Erik Jones the lead. And he had to do the same thing he did in 2019. Hold off a Joe Gibbs driver. This time, he wasn't a teammate to Denny Hamlin. He had to hold off a former teammate to play the spoiler. And he worked for it, and he did not look back whatsoever. He kept his eyes forward. I could tell that car was struggling a little bit late with the long runs, but He did what he needed to do, and Erik Jones is back in victory lane, and for the first time in 55 years, almost a little 5 years over half a century, the 43 wins at Darlington for the first time since 1967. The driver at that time, Richard Petty. And the last time the 43 won in the Cup Series recently was the 2014 rain-shortened race at Daytona, won by Aric Almirola on the 30-year anniversary that Richard Petty scored his 200th and final NASCAR Cup Series win. So, big historical moment for Erik Jones and the 43 team. Last night, of course, is the first win for GMS merged in with Petty. Of course, Maury Gallagher, Spencer Gallagher run the GMS part of the team. It was just great to see the famed 43 back in victory lane this year. And I've got a feeling the next couple of years, the way that this team's been performing this year, we could see a resurgence of dominance in that 43 car as long as Jones still sticks around. He is going to be back with the team next year, and I just got a good feeling that this is a team to watch out for years to come. The next-gen car has really benefited this race team this year. It's benefited kind of the smaller teams. We've seen what Trackhouse Racing has done. We've seen at times what it's benefited the Roush Fenway Keselowski cars as of late. Now, Petty GMS has really benefited from this year. And next year will be a big year for them, especially with Erik Jones getting a new teammate and Noah Gragson, who will graduate from the Xfinity Series up to the Cup Series to drive the number 42 car. And by the way, Gregson's former crew chief from the Xfinity Series is Jones' current crew chief, Dave Ellens. He got his first career win as a Cup crew chief last night. That's just pretty special. So congrats once again to Erik Jones, Dave Ellens, and the entire 43 team and Petty GMS Motorsports. You guys just won the Southern 500. Well done, boys. Number 2, playoff drivers coming up close. Denny Hamlin, Tyler Reddick. Boy, they were in the hunt the entire race. I mean, Denny Hamlin, we all know the history with Denny Hamlin at Darlington. He always runs well here. He always seems to find himself up there at the end of the race, battling for the win, or at least getting a good result out of it. He wasn't necessarily dominant last night, but they were consistent enough to run in the top 5, have good track position, and get a good amount of stage points. Remember, early in the season, Denny Hamlin was having good cars, but not the results they'd hoped for. Then they win at Richmond. They locked themselves in the playoffs. They win the Coke 600. And lately, we've seen better runs out of the 11 car. The last 2 races leading up to the playoffs, not the best of runs, but still good runs by the 11 car and good finishes by them. They've been starting to get momentum on their side. It looked like last night was going to be the night that Denny Hamlin was able to win his 4th, if I'm not mistaken, Southern 500. Because remember, he has 4 wins at this track. The 2010 Southern 500, the 2017 Southern 500, and he won the 2021 Southern 500 a year ago. And the second out of 3 races that we ran in 2020 when we were coming back from COVID, the one where Chase Elliott and Kyle Busch had their incident and let Elliott flip Kyle Busch off. Denny Hamlin really put the pressure on Erik Jones at the very closing laps of that race, but just couldn't get enough. He tried and tried and tried, it just wasn't enough. But still, it's a great point night for him. And for Tyler Reddick, his second career playoff appearance, back-to-back years. Of course, we know the big story with him. He's not going to be with RSDR in 2024. He's got 1 more year left with this team. He ran top 10 most of the night last night. Kind of struggled in the middle part of the race with the balance, but they picked it up at the very end when they got track position and they kept up with the racetrack. And if those two the 2 leaders had problems and made contact at the very end, Tyler Reddick could have been in the catbird seat to maybe win and get his first oval win and lock himself into the next round of the playoffs. I mean, with the Erik Jones win, nobody locked the spot up last night, but it was a good run for both Denny Hamlin and Tyler Reddick. They really needed those to get them some momentum for these next couple of races. Number 3, actually, the Gibbs cars face mechanical gremlins. We're talking about a playoff driver and a non-playoff driver. The first one we have to talk about is the non-playoff driver, Martin Truex, who did not make the playoffs after being out by a few points last week at Daytona. Came in determined to get some momentum for next year and prove that they were going to be a force to be reckoned with in 2023, and they'll get back to the playoffs next year. They came in as one of the favorites of the non-playoff drivers to have a chance to win, because Truex has won at Darlington before. He won the Southern 500 in 2016, and he won the spring race in 2021 a year ago. They had good speed last night in that 19 car. That car was fast. He was just so good when the sun was still out, and then when it went down and the moon came out, that 19 car was still fast. He was probably the best car on the long runs, especially when we got into the later stages of the race. Nobody could keep up with him. It looked like he was going to be untouchable. Well, with about 50 laps to go, he came on the radio and said, my engine's overheating, and he lost power steering. That really sucked because it looked like this race was his. Even with Denny Hamlin, his teammate, pitting a little later than everybody else, he was coming up to the front with fresh tires. But ultimately, Martin Truex had to take the car to the pit wall and eventually back behind the wall and out of the race. And I could tell the emotion in him when he was talking about the engine issue after he got knocked out. I could just see it in his eyes and his voice. It was really bummer. It's just so weird to see Truex in this spot, not even in the playoffs. It's been, 8 years since he missed the postseason. He didn't make it in 2014. It's just so odd to see him. He had a great race car. That's the really good thing he should keep his head high about. He had a great car last night, a car that could have won this race. If it wasn't for those mechanical gremlins, we would have been talking about Martin Truex Jr. probably in victory lane as a two-time Southern 500 winner. Unfortunately, it's not the case. But he wasn't the only Gibbs car to have problems. As I mentioned, Kyle Busch entering this playoffs, which could be for the final time with JGR. Again, still has not made an announcement yet about his future. Kyle Busch last night was arguably the dominant car. They had the best car, stage 1. They had the best car, dominant car, shall I say, in stage 2, where they won the stage. They led the most laps, 155. But I could tell short runs were the bread and butter for Kyle Busch. The long runs were kind of his Achilles heel. So when a caution came out for Cody Ware hitting the wall with about 30 to go, it was pretty much Kyle Busch's golden opportunity to come and get this tires. And if I can hold them off in the short run, we're home free and we're on to the next round. But as I mentioned, just about a lap and a half before we get ready to go back green, under the caution pace laps, I saw some smoke trailing from the back of Kyle Busch's car, and I'm thinking, is that really an engine? And lo and behold, smoke came off both of the exhaust pipes. Kyle Busch blew up. The first engine failure for him since the season opening race in 2020 in the Daytona 500. It's been almost a year and a half, a little over a year and a half, since Kyle Busch last blew up. So that was, I was stunned. I'm like, oh my goodness, this gives the opportunity for not just Erik Jones, but the other playoff drivers that probably couldn't keep up with Kyle Busch other than Denny Hamlin. So a big misfortune last night at the very end of the race for two Gibbs cars, one playoff driver, one non-playoff driver. Is this something that we could see the next couple of weeks? Because it doesn't look good for either one of these guys. Of course, Kyle Busch, despite the stage win with the engine failure, he's currently 11th in the point standings. He's 8 points above the cutoff line. That's not a comfortable margin. And there's a lot of other guys around him that had really rough nights like he did. So he's going to be in a battle to have to run well these next couple of races if he wants to make it to the round of 12. But dominant night by most of the Gibbs guys. Unfortunately, two of them fall the wayside due to mechanical gremlins. Number 4, playoff drivers face adversity. A lot of drivers that were part of the 16 playoff grid to race for this championship ran into a lot of trouble last night. The first was our regular season champion and our 2020 Cup champ, Chase Elliott, who qualified 23rd, worked his way up to 14th, but with 3 to go in stage 1, he loses it in turns 1 and 2, backs into the outside wall, and then gets rear-ended from behind by another playoff driver in Chase Briscoe. Elliott had to go to pit road, and they had to try to fix the car. And I want to quickly point out that NASCAR gave every single driver, not just the playoff drivers, but every other driver for the final 10 races, 4 extra minutes on the damaged vehicle clock. So basically, you had 6 minutes originally to try to work on the car. If you got the car back out there before the clock expired and you met minimum speed, you're good to continue on. If you did not get off pit road in time, meet the minimum speed, or you didn't beat the clock, you're done for the night. Elliott was given 10 minutes to work on that car. Unfortunately, the upper control arm in the right rear was completely broken, and they were not able to fix it. He finished dead last. And that drops him to 9th in the point standings, only 14 points above. So that's a little bit of a comfortable margin. He's going to need to run really well next week to feel good going into Bristol, which he probably will, but just a real bummer to see that happen. And then Kyle Larson, his teammate, early on in the race, a couple laps before that happened, pitted under green after making his green flag pit stop because he's playing, I got a motor problem. He's had 3 of them early this year. Phoenix blew up. Darlington spring race blew up. Last week at Daytona blew up before stage 1 completely ended. So it looked like it was going to hurt him again. He went 3 laps down, eventually 4 laps down. But guess what? Kyle Larson got all those laps back, even with a spin in the middle of stage 2. He got all those laps back and rebounded to finish 12th. He was really the only guy that rebounded from any of those issues last night. So it was a big bounce back from what seemed to be a really down night early on for that 5 team. Ross Chastain, he seemed to have a good race car, but in the middle of early part of stage 2, actually, he had debris get in the left rear section of his tire rods, and he had to come down pit road and take some of that out. They were able to get back out there, but they finished laps down in the 20th spot. His teammate Daniel Suarez started at the rear, actually, because he failed pre-qualifying inspection 3 times, which meant he had to start dead last and server passed through after they took the green flag. Luckily, he got a caution at lap 6 for a little sprinkle on the track, got his lap back, worked his way up to the top 5. That car was really fast and could have finished in the top 5, but a couple of, in the middle of green flag pit stops in the beginning and the lower portion of the final stage, he got caught for speeding, and a caution came out at that time when another playoff driver had problems, so we'll get to him in a second. Suarez got caught a lap down, and eventually he had to serve the pass-through under yellow, and that meant he never got his lap back, and he only had to settle for an 18th place finish, I believe. It was just not a good result for him. And the other playoff driver I mentioned, I'm about to talk about, Kevin Harvick, running top 15, top 20 early on, got his way to the top 10 at the very end, but on the front stretch, the car burst into flames. The exhaust, the lower part of the right corner of the exhaust system apparently burnt up, and he stopped on the racetrack and had to hop out of the car. And Kevin Harvick, in his post-race interview after that incident, was not happy, saying, we're bringing crappy-ass parts to these cars these weeks. He just was really frustrated. I mean, I understand the frustration because he didn't really have the car to win, but he's upset about how this stuff is happening with this new car that we've got this year, and he felt like we shouldn't be having these problems whatsoever. But it happened, and he unfortunately fell out, and he's now the lowest of the playoff drivers. He's 13 points below the cutoff line. The drivers below the cutoff line at the end of the night are Kevin Harvick, Chase Briscoe, Austin Dillon, who struggled for most of the night but was able to salvage a 17th place finish, the best he possibly could, and I think it's Daniel Suarez below. It's either him or Austin Cindric. One's 2 above, one's 2 below. Cindric just got a top 15 last night. Those guys are going to be literally fine tooth and nail. I think the big loser is Chase Briscoe, because the next couple races are going to be tough for him. He did not run well in Kansas early in the year, so they're going to have to work hard. Harvick didn't either, but lately they've got momentum on their side, so hopefully they can put beside the issue that happened last night and rebound. But those are some of the playoff drivers that had problems last night. And number 5, playoff drivers that were able to capitalize: Joey Logano, Christopher Bell, as I mentioned, Kyle Larson, William Byron, Alex Bowman, and Ryan Blaney were able to come away with a decent, clean night. Logano started on the pole, looked like the best car in stage 1, lost the lead late, kind of lost track position and couldn't keep up with the track at stage 2, but then stage 3 came around, he got better, and ended up with a 4th place finish, which is a good run for Logano, who won earlier this year in the spring. Christopher Bell, of course, won at Lauderdale this year and made it in the playoffs. Really good race car, just like his teammates last night. Wasn't on par like they were, but still good enough to run top 5 and get a good result out of it. Alex Bowman and William Byron, those to talk about the top 2 best Hendrick cars, had their problems, even though one of them was able to rebound somewhat from it. The lower 2 have not really had the years they'd hoped for. William Byron hadn't had a top 10 since April or May, but this dude put together a really good run in the first stage last night. He won stage 1, he looked to be the best car, then he complained he might have some mechanical issues in his engine, but turned out to not really be the case. They still had good speed based on the timing charts, and they were able to get out of the race with an 8th place finish. And as for Alex Bowman, not great, but certainly not bad. Kept it clean all night long, got a 10th place finish. Good points night for both of those guys. They're both above the cutoff at the end of this night. And as I mentioned, Ryan Blaney, top 15, good run for him, even though he has one top 10 at Darlington, still better than what most people thought was going to happen to him. He really kind of ran top 5, top 10 the entire night. So some playoff drivers were able to capitalize on some really good runs and get good points out of it. So now that the chaos of Darlington is officially in the books, and by the way, good racing in general last night with this next-gen car for the Southern 500 and the nighttime. It was hard to pass, but still the exciting battles that we had, the playoff spoiler and Erik Jones to win, and playoff drivers having their problems, definitely provided a lot of intrigue and storylines from last night's race. Now we're off to the Windy City in Kansas. Can the playoff drivers that had problems last night overcome those and have a good run, or will the Wicked Witch of the West still put a curse on them? We're going to find out. It'll be interesting to see what happens, and let's see if Kyle Larson can try to make up for one he could have won earlier this year had he gotten by Kurt Busch late. But we will see what happens. It's going to be a fun one. So hope you all have a wonderful week, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your Labor Day today and have a nice barbecue and all that. Subscribe, like. I hope you all enjoyed the Southern 500, and congrats once again to Erik Jones and the 43 team on their win last night. Have a great week, everybody. Let's go racing!